Town Hall Q&A with U.S. Senate candidate from New York, Diane Sare. Sare was recently successful in getting more than 70,000 petition signatures and will be on the ballot November 5th. She's running against the incumbent, Senator Gillibrand, who's been in the Senate for nearly 15 years. And the contrast between the two couldn't be more stark. Senator Gillibrand has been pro-war, sending billions of dollars to the Ukraine and Gaza, while Sare remains committed to a peace and prosperity platform. I'm Ian Snow Carpenter from the Live1.tv studio in New York, and tonight, our town hall with candidate Diane Sare. Good evening, Diane. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm happy to be here again.
Great. So you are in the midst of a very exciting and serious campaign for everybody in New York. You're running for the position of U.S. Senate to replace Kristen Gillibrand. Can you please tell us what kind of thoughts you're having now and what is on your mind right now for the campaign?
Well, I think what we have to look forward to is the likely total blowout of the transatlantic financial system. We're headed for the end of the third quarter. As people may recall, various of these major crashes occur this time of year. And you have to remember that that is the driver of war. This, what we call, or Eisenhower called, the military-industrial complex, is this peculiar slime mold of billionaire elites. You think of BlackRock, to which, well, our government is sending a lot of money to Ukraine. Somehow BlackRock owns about a third of Ukraine at this point. They're also a major shareholder in many of our military industrial corporations like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, et cetera. I don't have the list in front of me, so I can't tell you which ones are BlackRock, which ones are Vanguard, which ones are State Street. But this is as like a creature that's taken on a life of its own. What you really need is the vampire slayer to come with the steak and the garlic to put this rotten system to rest. Their view is they would be perfectly happy to risk the annihilation of the entire human race in thermonuclear war by pushing Russia past the point of no return. And, unfortunately, we have a lot of very arrogant, maybe younger people or people who are just too arrogant to care about history and cultural differences. So they don't understand the Russian mindset. First of all, you would have to remember that the Soviet Union lost 27 million people in World War II. So the idea of never again is something that they are very committed to. And Putin made this very clear the day before he began the special military operation in Ukraine, where he had warned in December that it was not acceptable for Ukraine to join NATO. It was not acceptable for NATO to place nuclear weapons in Ukraine right on Russia's border, and that he would not tolerate ethnic cleansing of the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass. So what did NATO, Biden, Boris Johnson do? They urged the Nazi-infested Azov battalion, the Ukrainian army, which had been trained by NATO and the US and UK, to mass tens of thousands of troops on the border with the Donbass to prepare for an attack. Russia also moved onto the border, and we kept hearing about it from Biden. If you remember, Russia's going to invade Ukraine. It's going to occur on February 20th. It's going to occur on February 17th. He was giving us precise dates. I later realized the reason he was able to do that was because the NATO forces and the Ukrainian fascist military were planning to do a full-on assault in that region at that time. They shelled Donetsk, the city of Donetsk, with 1,600 shells in just a few hours. And so Russia took action, and they found a lot of documents showing that there actually was a full-scale assault plan. So Putin was correct. Putin also made, just prior to that, a short video where he said, and unlike the US, Russia has a no first use doctrine. So they say, of nuclear weapons, they say that we will not use nuclear weapons unless there is an existential threat to Russia. Uh, and that's, pretty clear. They've also include if you are going to eliminate our ability to launch a second strike. So attacking their radar facilities would fall under that category, I believe. Um, so what happened is that Putin made this video saying if we are pushed to nuclear war, we in Russia, everyone will be dead. We in Russia will die as martyrs, and everyone in the West who did this will burn in hell, basically. Now, when you decide that you are going to be a martyr, there's a certain kind of peace that comes with that decision. You say, I may die, but at least I'm going to heaven or wherever. So the idea of the West to say that Putin is bluffing means that you have absolutely no understanding of the Russian Orthodox Church or this view. And therefore, it is extremely dangerous right now. This invasion of Kursk, where apparently the Ukrainian troops, who are intermingled with many Western troops, mercenaries or maybe otherwise, I hope not, were using very advanced AI. They were getting computer generated images of where the Russians were not going to be in the future. That is, it wasn't only satellites showing real time, but showing what the computer, the robots, or the AI determined the Russians were likely to do based on patterns, profiles, etc. And this is why the Ukrainian army was able to grab so much territory. Russia is repelling them. They are not going to succeed. They're not going to take Russia. Russia has vastly more manpower and more resources at its disposal, and the Russian army is marching through Donetsk at quite a pace. And as you may have heard, they just knocked out a whole bunch of energy and water infrastructure surrounding Kiev. Maybe Lindsey Graham can't go back there again. So this is really dangerous. Then over in Southwest Asia, you have Bibi Netanyahu, I think of him as being like a hand grenade for, the British Empire and the American lackeys of the British Empire, who can just blow up the whole region by starting a war with Iran, with Hezbollah. Now he's invaded the West Bank, killing a bunch of people, even as he continues this genocide in Gaza, which we're not even supposed to talk about, even though it's occurring before our eyes. And I think this creates a certain kind of corruption in the American people if you go along with it. But the driver is the blowout of the financial system. And that is why what Lyndon LaRouche proposed, and what we really have to consider, is that nothing will work except a bankruptcy reorganization. Just admit it. Why do we have to honor a bunch of billionaires? They didn't do anything to get rich. It's not like the railroad. I mean, maybe Elon Musk actually produced something, but Mark Zuckerberg, give me a break. Bill Gates, what is the value? And then you have people like Warren Buffett or others, Jamie Dimon, who just figured out how to rip other people off. That's not something to be worshiped. That doesn't give them great moral authority. So we should stop respecting them so much and put this system through an orderly bankruptcy reorganization. And I'm sure if the United States government had a change of heart and had the guts to do it, China, Russia, others of the BRICS nations would be willing to help us work on establishing a new system. And we might even restore faith in the dollar. But at the moment, since we're using the dollar as a weapon, no one's going to trust us. So we are at an unbelievable moment in history. Those of us who are here in the United States, those of us who are American citizens and can act to change our government, have been given a moment of opportunity where we really must act. The future for perhaps thousands of years is going to be determined in the coming weeks. That's what I can tell you.
Are you hearing what might be the possible, what is a final outcome or a final solution that Washington is looking for in this conflict? I'm not sure what their final solution is.
Well, some of them may be so deluded that they think Russia will just back down and admit. The London Economist did an editorial in 2007, March of 2007. It was supposedly a fictional piece looking forward to the anniversary of the European Union 50 years ahead. And they said, well, back in 2008, when President Obama was dealing with the housing collapse, now in March of 2007, there had not even been a primary. I don't even know if Obama had announced he was running at that point, but the London Economist had this article saying that, and they said, and we were almost going to have a war over Ukraine. Obama threatened the use of nuclear weapons and forced Russia to back down and get out of Ukraine. Pretty wild. And then they say that this threat of nuclear weapons was so impressive and they threatened Russia so much that the Russians finally cowed and came to their senses and crawled on their hands and knees and begged to join the European Union. That was the London Economist narrative in 2007. Have they been smoking so much dope or whatever they smoke to believe that this is something that's a real possibility?
So I get the feeling that many Americans are in denial that we are actually in a war and killing Russians. It feels like we've been dragged into the most serious war since World War II. And I think a lot of people don't even know where to put the pieces together to understand how this could possibly end. I'm not sure what Russia's final solution would be here either. When will Russia feel that enough is enough? Or this could possibly go on for another 10 or 20, 30 years. Do you get that feeling if it's not
No,
stopped?
it definitely won't go on that long. The Russians want to end this war definitely by the end of the year. And I think their escalation in Kiev is indicative of that. And look, I don't know how much longer they can keep bailing out this bubble of $2 quadrillion of derivatives. So that's not going to last that long either. And that's why I think it's really, really urgent that people have in mind a solution concept. If all of the things you take for granted suddenly collapsed, if the institutions collapsed, what kind of world would you imagine? How should the US government function? Can we look at what Alexander Hamilton did after the American Revolution when our nation was hopelessly indebted? In fact, many people argued, I think it was 53 or $57 million, which in 1787 was a huge amount of money. So many people said, oh, look, everybody knows we just had this revolution. They are not going to expect us to repay the debt. And Hamilton said, no, if we ever want to borrow a nickel again, we better repay it, but let's not divide it all among the separate states. Let's consolidate the debt. Let's come up with a plan, which included actually issuing more credit, that is increasing the debt initially, so that the government would have the resources to invest in building roads, building canals, building water management systems, and creating the conditions for the population to be gainfully employed and more productive. And lo and behold, he was able to pay off all of that debt, save the credit of the United States, and get the United States on a path to being by far the most productive economy in the world.
Um, can we move over to the subject of the war in Gaza? Within the last 7 days, there are apparently more killings of Palestinians in an area, the West Bank. And the week before that, apparently Beirut is going through rolling blackouts in Lebanon. It's really hard to get reliable information as to when is Israel going to stop this assault, or when is the United States going to demand it stop and stop resupplying weapons? Do you think that this is something that could end soon, or is this going to carry through for months?
I don't know. And you asked the right question, which is if the United States demanded that it stop, it would stop. We saw that with Reagan and Menachem Begin, who was bombing southern Lebanon. Reagan called him up, said, cut it out. He said, no. Then he called back Reagan 20 minutes later and said, it stopped. There are no more shells. The president of the United States could stop this immediately. We have no inclination to stop it. That's the crime of the whole thing. And so I don't know. This has already gone on longer than I would have thought. Obviously, the resistance in Gaza is putting up quite a fight. People are not just going to surrender to this fascist approach that the Israelis, barbaric and reminiscent of the Nazi tactics of house-to-house fighting and just mass slaughter. As you probably know, the British journal The Lancet estimates the death toll is now approaching 200,000 Palestinians. And I think that's probably accurate because the figures we have of 40 or 45,000 are based on the individuals that they have names for. But who knows how many people are buried under rubble, how many people died outside of a hospital or someplace, unknown. How is this all being reported? I think it's the height of cynicism to tolerate this. And I have to say, I'm really losing my patience with people who attempt to make any justification for this. Because one opposes genocide does not mean that one endorses what happened on October 7th. And as Colonel McGregor and others who are more astute than I am on this matter, I think there are a lot of questions about how October 7th came to occur and what actually happened there that need to be answered as well.
I got to hear Ray McGovern, former CIA personnel, Ray McGovern, who I know you've also get to talk with. And he suggested that the Biden administration is so fearful of Trump winning the election that they might start exacerbating this conflict with Russia to the point of even avoiding a November 5th election, or even if they do that, that they may avoid the transition in January to Trump. This was some of the things that former CIA personnel Ray McGovern said recently. Do you think that that could be
Well, I
something?
think they'll just find it easier to steal the election. I mean, I don't see any evidence that we're going to have a fair election. Nothing has changed since 2020. Now, that's not to say they might not also escalate why should they only do one horrible thing at a time? They can do multiple horrible things at a time. I think we have to keep our nerve, and we must not forget that 2/3 of the world's population has moved off this sinking ship. If you look at the process of the BRICS, if you look at the optimism, and I understand there's talk about a Palestinian state joining the BRICS or having representation there. I think that's really interesting. There's a whole different worldview for the majority of mankind, which is not bestial and cynical, and is much more open to the kind of things that my mentor and collaborator, Lyndon LaRouche, envisioned for the world and the relationship among nations of the world, and what John Quincy Adams really intended uh, in crafting some of the policies of the United States.
Diane, if you're elected to the position of U.S. Senate, you're not going to be in support of any of this. We know that from listening to you. Can you tell us a little bit? You did recently get on the ballot, and for people who aren't familiar with what that means, but the card stock that you're handed in a voting precinct will have your name printed there. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right. So I talked to some young people in Queens, New York today, and I mentioned your name to them, and their first reaction was, "Oh, she's cool." And are you getting a chance to measure people's reaction to your campaign? Are you getting a favorable response from people, or are people sort of dead set just to stay out of politics and let things, maybe not even vote, some people?
Well, among the young people I've met at rallies protesting the genocide, I've gotten generally a favorable response. I think a lot of them do want to participate. I think they were moralized, frankly, by the effect of their uncommitted mobilization in the Democratic presidential primaries. That had quite an effect. So they're beginning to have a sense of flexing their muscle, feeling that they have a little bit more power than they used to. I did get quite a negative response from an American who's serving in the Israeli Defense Forces, who I happened to meet on the street yesterday on 86th Street where we were campaigning. He was very nasty and vicious. But, anyone who is sane, I don't see how any reasonable person could possibly vote for Kirsten Gillibrand or Mike Sapricone. There's just, you look at the crisis we're in, who is talking about reality? And often people tell me when I am able to speak publicly, is they'll come up and say, you're the only person who said everything that I've been thinking about. Other people are just not addressing it. And so the response is favorable. The big problem is breaking through the blackout and the censorship. Remember, John Brennan was the former head of the CIA. He's now a news anchorman at MSNBC. What do you think that means? That's not even subtle. That means that our mainstream press is absolutely part and parcel of the intelligence agencies and their wartime propaganda. And unfortunately, many people haven't found their way to YouTube or, Scott Ritter or Ray McGovern or Judge Napolitano or these various podcasts with retired military and intelligence experts, and they are still wandering around lost in the dark with mistaken assumptions. So one thing I want to do, and I would ask the people there to get to their networks and anyone who's listening on the live stream, help me donate. I don't need millions of dollars. I don't pay consultants to tell me how to dress or what. You can judge whether that's a problem or not. But I do need to print literature. I want to get billboards. I'm looking at billboards in Queens, actually. And these things are expensive. They're $3,500 a month. So if I'm going to get that space, if I'm going to get visibility, printing a bunch of things to hang on doors, making a bunch of lawn signs. I saw a bunch of lawn signs today that one of my supporters had put out all over Route 17 in Orange County. It was great, wonderful to see them out there. So we have to break through the blackout so that people know that I exist and they have a choice other than, death by arsenic or death by hanging.
Diane, we are here in a town hall with live members in the audience, and they would like to ask questions. So I'm going to put Akil and welcome Akil to the stage and let him ask his question.
Okay.
Thank you for your time. Actually, I don't have a question. 2 days ago I heard about you and I checked website and me my personally 100% with you. My suggestion is I participate in a lot of groups or movements to stop the genocide in Middle East and Palestine. And my
Mhm.
suggestion is if you're like you guys, they help you to maybe communicate with these founders or with this like groups or with this organization, because I'm definitely with people I know now, we don't know about you. So maybe this is good opportunity to communicate with these groups or this organization and spread your words around. So as we push the George Galloway in the British to be
Yes.
in a house, maybe we can do something for you. This is
Yes.
just a suggestion, you know.
I think that's possible. I've been speaking at a number of mosques, but mostly downstate, not in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, other places. Uh, but if you have ideas of people I should be in touch with or people who have organizations, please tell Suzanne, who I think is there, and we will reach out.
I already told her. Actually, I saw the action from the Muslims mosque is not really playing big role in this protest or doing their vows against genocide. They are so quiet. But the young people,
I
yeah,
think there's a reason for that. I mean, remember the I just watched the film on the Newburgh Four, if you've seen it, the Newburgh Sting. Do you remember that?
no, really.
Oh my gosh. I mean, they're really targeting the mosques. It's really terrible. It's outrageous. It's part of the censorship. But I actually have met a number of young people who are active in the anti-genocide uh, demonstrations. But if you know more, please give us the contacts of the leaders. They really should have me speak.
We were looking for that. I will do my best and communicate with Mrs. Susanna about that.
Great.
Hopefully, we'll see you guys in Labor Day, maybe. The next one.
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you for your time.
We have Omar here from Queens, New York, Diane.
Hi, Omar.
It's evening, Diane. Very pressing question, and you addressed it many times just recently with the shutdown of the psychiatric mental institutions in New York, decreased by 90%. The Goldman Sachs shutdown, criminal shutdown of the recent hospital that in Manhattan, where people are obviously going to die now in the future. What and coincidentally, Trump referenced the rise in chronic illnesses, autism cases, so on and so forth. And I don't think it was a coincidence, but I see a connection there. What would be your suggestion to the Trump campaign? What's been referenced before as the world health system, or primarily a modern national health system?
Well, that's actually a complex question. To start with, there's a certain level of basic infrastructure that's needed, and we no longer have that. You had immediately following World War II something called the Hill-Burton Act, which mandated on average 4.5 hospital beds per 1,000 population. It varied from rural to city areas, but you wanted to make sure that every single person in this country had access, that is physical access to a hospital to get care. We are shutting down hundreds of hospitals everywhere. And we are also downgrading our hospitals. What happened with Beth Israel is it was basically looted and asset stripped by Mount Sinai, because the board of trustees of Mount Sinai is a bunch of Goldman Sachs real estate goons who don't care about people's health, but about making money. So first of all, you need the infrastructure to deliver care. We also have a crisis in science. people are not trained to make creative discoveries, and trained is a bad word, educated. They are trained to be computers, and therefore they only regurgitate out what is programmed into them. My father, who happens to be a physician, was telling me a story of watching a friend of his who's from the time the guy may have been a World War II generation medical doctor before they had all these imaging machines and things. So they had put this patient through this machine, that machine, this machine, couldn't figure out what was wrong. This doctor examined the patient, just palpitated a few areas on the stomach and abdomen and said, it's X. And this older doctor nailed exactly what the ailment was, which none of the machines could detect. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't scan people. It's great that you can take an x-ray. That obviously helps identify broken bones and all kinds of other problems. But there's not a sense of cause and effect. You know, Gottfried Leibniz, one of the founders of science after Nicholas of Cusa, always asked the important question, why is it so and not otherwise? Why must it be? What could be the cause of this? And we've lost that ability to think, so we don't take a holistic approach to health. Someone comes in and they say, you know, my arm hurts. And you say, oh, well, let's put your arm in a sling. Well, they may not have noticed that you broke your back and you were using your arm. You know what I'm saying? They don't look at the they don't look at the whole picture. So I think this is part of a general cultural shift we have to make, where we say the number one value is human life. We are precious. Each human being is precious. Each human being has infinite potential for creative discovery. You never know which person might be the next genius composer. I mean, one of the things I found so gut-wrenching when you hear the stories of who has been killed in Palestine is not only poets, but I got a report from a peace group I went to see in Westchester County, where it turned out one of the members of the group was a violinist, and she had a student in Gaza who was an extremely talented 14-year-old girl. And somehow hearing of this girl being killed in these horrific bombings, you realize it just makes a sense of how criminal it is and all of the potential that's being snuffed out. Who knows which of these babies who have been killed might have discovered the cure to Parkinson's or pancreatic cancer or written an incredible symphony. And they never were given the chance to do that. So I think this is the sense, this is what government has to do. This is what economy is about, is making it possible for every human being to fulfill their God-given potential.
Hello, Diane. Good luck in the race. And
Thanks.
we have in the Constitution, Article 1, 2, and 3, that is the Senate, the House, and the executives. I anticipate we're going to have that majority for however long. And I also anticipate the opposition is going to throw everything at us, including the kitchen sink, maybe 2 or 3 kitchen sinks, to cut down on our sessions. What I wanted to ask you to speak on is standalone single subject bills as opposed to omnibus and all-inclusive bills. Could you tell us?
I think that's a great idea. I mean, remember the Dodd-Frank Act? They were trying to get the congressman to vote on it before the thing was even written. You know, It's amazing. So, absolutely. I mean, if you read the original Glass-Steagall Act on bank separation, I think it's maybe 12 pages or 8 pages. It's very, very simple and very clear. This is why investment banks are separate from commercial banks, and never the twain shall meet. It was just clear, it had a purpose, and that was it. So I think I share your concern, unless you are arguing for these crazy omnibus bills, but I don't think you are.
Is there anyone else, or shall I ask another? Um, the Senate had a very paper-thin majority of one vote, and they ruled as if they had an out-and-out mandate from a landslide. I anticipate the Senate will get the majority, about maybe 3 or 4, hopefully maybe 5 or 6 seats. So with that, what our party needs is unity. We can't have people dividing our party, because that plays right into the hands of the Democrats, as we saw happened in the House. The House lost a month, close to 2 months of sessions, just deciding who's going to be the speaker. So what I would expect from somebody going into the Senate was, we have to have unity, we have to have continuity, we have to have everybody attending every session and voting on every vote.
Well, I think if I may, the voters are going to have to get out their pitchforks and chase down their representatives, because they let people get away with this. And unfortunately, there is an awful lot of unity, and I mean the worst kind of unity, between the two parties, where they vote together. I remember a vote maybe a couple years ago, after Skripal, the Skripal poisoning, which was blamed with absolutely no evidence and everything pointing to the contrary, but it was blamed on Putin. So the Senate voted 98-2 to put sanctions on Russia in a case for which there was absolutely zero evidence. And I think part of what we therefore have to address is the money in politics. Who owns these congressmen? What stock are they holding? What are their families invested in? Have they signed a term limits pledge? Mr. LaRouche opposed term limits, and I did, but for the moment, until we can get big money out of politics, I think we should try and abide by what the founders intended clearly, which is that people weren't supposed to move to Washington and stay there, like Chuck Schumer, who will have been there for 50 years at the end of his Senate term, which comes up in 2026. You're supposed to be part of society. You're supposed to work in society. You're supposed to know the people you represent. You're supposed to have empathy with your constituents so that you can go and represent them. And if they're wrong, sometimes public opinion is wrong. Okay, then, but they have elected you because they trust you to get to the truth of the matter. And you may take a vote that they don't understand, but maybe you could have a town meeting and explain why you did what you did. I think that politics has to be much more active. I would consider the people the fourth branch of government. You spoke about 3, and that's the official branches, but George Washington, in his farewell address, spoke quite a bit about the enormous power that our Constitution gives the American people. And he spoke very highly, therefore, of the importance of culture, morality, religion, education. If the people are going to have a lot of power, then you want them to be good. You want them to be well educated. You want them to love mankind. You don't want a bunch of social miscreant Jeffrey Epstein types deciding who gets elected or not. So that requires, in that sense, a shift. And that's really what I think. I think this is more important than parties per se or party unity, is the question of who owns these people, the money that's in the politics. Personally, I would propose not donation limits, but spending limits. That's a great equalizer. What is a candidate allowed to spend in an election? And that's it. How early before the election are you allowed to start campaigning, et cetera, that kind of thing. This Citizens United has been a disaster, but it was a disaster prior to that.
Hi, Diana. You're
Hi,
very,
good to see you again.
to see you. You're very smart. You understand the people. You are like mom who in the house know about the kids' problem, about everything. When I hear you, I say, oh my gosh, whatever I think, she said. But I want to say thank you so much. I diagnosed with the fibroma, with the myoma, a few months ago, like 4 or 5 months ago. And it's a lot of mistake in healthcare. Uh, Wherever you say, I feel you are very feeling the people. I want to thank you so much. But how come is the system is broken if somebody not working nothing and they have a Medicaid or insurance? How is that? How
Well,
the
it's all
system is
covered.
broken.
I know. And as you said, even though they have insurance, they're not going to get good health care. So the point is, we have to change everything. I want to give an example because it's very important and it gets at these questions, which is the US space program. You've probably heard the expression, failure is not an option. Well, that was said by Gene Kranz, who was in charge of mission control when Apollo 13 had the accident. It was a question, I forget, I can't remember the details of what went wrong, but they had to figure out how to get those astronauts back to Earth without them burning up in the atmosphere on the way down. And the orbits are such that you don't have an indefinite amount of time. There's only a certain window where you can get the right momentum to come back into Earth orbit. Now, he had lived through the horror of Apollo 1, where 3 of our astronauts got into the capsule and there was an error and they burned to death. They burned to death on the launch pad. And again, it was one of these moments where, and also I think that there was a deep personal sense of dedication to this because Kennedy had been assassinated. And of course, President Kennedy had really insisted we were going to get to the moon by the end of the decade. And people felt a certain personal responsibility for that. So after these deaths, Krantz just said, no, we are never going to have that. Everything is going to be perfect. There is going to be no mistake. No mistake is allowed. And that was the standard of our space program. And we didn't lose any more astronauts until the Challenger. And again, it was a money saving. It all comes out to be we're saving money. Well, who cares? Human life is more precious. Money is arbitrary. You make it up. It doesn't have any value. I mean, we want to send a bunch of weapons to the Ukrainians, $200 billion, just like that. But $78 billion to make all the needed repairs to the NYSHA buildings? Oh, no, we don't have it. And then they say, where are you going to get the money? Well, jerk, you printed the money, we can issue credit. If you have a national bank, the government has the power to do that. That's why I'm saying we have to stop having so much respect for this billionaire class. And people better actually reflect on the fact that, every one of us is going to die. we're not here for very long. 100 years, if you're really lucky, out of 5 billion years that the planet has been here, it's a little tiny sliver. You can't take it with you. So why not think about doing those things that allow you to make an immortal contribution, to do something where your life is a gift to the people who went before you, who hope to create a pathway where you could do something great, and for the people who come after you.
Diana, I appreciate wherever you say, you feeling the people. I want to thank you. We love you. You are very nice and kind. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Lovely to see you again.
Hello, I'm Matthias from Germany, and I have a simple question, or two. I have two things in mind about the candidacy of Robert Kennedy Jr. He did something I do not fully understand because I'm not an American. One thing is that he somehow is, I don't know whether he's filing something, some ruling about the Trump election or the last election process. And the other thing about the same two people is that he's pulling out of the race in the swing states. And I'm interested in, is this of any significance, or is it maybe also insignificant? What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's extremely significant. It's the first time that I know of that this has ever been done. I thought his speech on the day in Arizona, when he then appeared later with Trump in Arizona, was very clear, which is he said, look, if the system weren't rigged, if we had a Democratic Party primary where people go in and they vote for the Democratic candidate, I would have won. The polls showed that I was beating Biden, but the Democratic Party could not allow that because the Democratic Party is today the party of fascism and war. And therefore, they made their own rules, and they actually told him, if you win in New Hampshire or the Iowa caucuses, too bad for your voters, because we're not going to give you delegates to the convention. We're going to give all the delegates to Biden. So Kennedy already had to leave the Democratic Party. He decided, what's the point of doing this? I'm going to run. And then if I get any votes, the party's going to give them to the guy I'm running against. That doesn't make, how can I allow people to be disenfranchised in that way? So then he decided to run as an independent, which is extremely difficult, as I know from what we had to do here in New York. But imagine doing that in 50 states. Now, all of them are not as difficult as New York. New York is probably the hardest. But imagine having to get on the ballot in 50 states with all separate rules. He described one fellow, I forget where, Arizona or Texas, who was tall and athletic and who told Kennedy that he lost 25 pounds petitioning. They gathered over 1 million signatures to put him on the ballot, and people did it at great personal expense and hardship. And then, even when they got on the ballot, the Democratic Party went to court to try and get them thrown off the ballot, as they're doing right now in New York. So he said, looking at what Kamala Harris is doing, what the Biden administration represents, that he does not want to be a spoiler. He said, and a spoiler means that you being in the race throws the election, that his being in the race would take so many votes away from Trump that he would end up helping Kamala Harris or whoever the Democratic Party chose to win the election. He found that unconscionable. So he said, therefore, I'm going to stay on the ballot in the states where it's already very clearly Republican or Democrat, I think in the hopes that he could get 2%, 5%, for example, if he were on the ballot in the state of New York. if you get 2% of the vote, then you can create a new party in New York that has ballot status. So he didn't want to leave the efforts of all these people who wanted another choice in vain. So in the states where he's not going to prevent Trump or Harris from winning the election, he will remain on the ballot. In the states where it's very close and a 1 or 2% margin of vote for him could possibly throw the election to Kamala Harris or prevent Trump from winning the election, he is taking his name off the ballot. Now, in another stupid twist of American rigged electoral politics, some states are saying, well, you can't remove your name from the ballot. So people, and that's clearly a Democratic Party ploy to let people in that state vote for someone who's not even running for president in that state. It's really disgusting. But they are doing every dirty trick possible to prevent Donald Trump from winning, including creating absolute hysteria. And I have to say, I am not endorsing Donald Trump. I actually have major substantive disagreements with him, particularly on Israel, Gaza, and other matters, how to handle the immigrant crisis and his assassination of Soleimani, which he keeps bragging about. I think that was terrible. The fact that he didn't let Assange out of prison, he didn't drop the charges. You know, he made some big mistakes. However, he wants to end the war with Ukraine and Russia, and I think teamed up with Kennedy, maybe they're going to go to war against the CIA and some of these intelligence agencies. So if Trump wins, there may be a possibility to actually address some very real problems. Whereas if the Democrats win, if Kamala becomes president, which they intend to do anyway through vote fraud, election fraud, I should say, then we're really in a very difficult situation. If you look at the censorship, if you look at the FBI raids they're using the FBI as a tool of thought control. So personally, I am not endorsing a presidential candidate. I am saying that Kamala Harris cannot be allowed to win under any circumstances. Kennedy has been more explicit. I think he will go and campaign with Trump. And he was clear. He said, look, we have some very serious disagreements, but he said, the things most important to me, stopping the Ukraine-Russia war, stopping the censorship, children's health, the medical, these are things that Trump has promised me that we will work on together. And Trump has said he's going to give Kennedy a spot, I don't know doing what, in his administration. So that's why he did what he did. I think it was a very bold move. It's clearly causing heart attacks all over the place, which is among the right people. And it still doesn't let us off the hot seat because the American people better get involved. And as I said, hold your representatives to account. There is no guarantee that Trump will have a good policy. Is he willing to denounce Steve Bannon or Mike Pompeo? Is he going to bring in a bunch of neocons again? I don't know. That's why we have to be active in this period.
Diane, I want to thank you, and hopefully we're going to follow your campaign closely, okay?
I hope you do.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. You've been listening to candidate for U.S. Senate in New York, Diane Sare, and the Live1.tv Town Hall. You can follow Diane's campaign by going to sareforsenate.com. And don't forget to follow Live1.tv, accurate source of information on government, politics, and art.